little pre-video sequence here just to say sorry for the delay. You may notice there's a few changes of haircuts, there's a good few changes of clothes during this, because I had to keep stop-starting to video it in between finishing my kitchen and ordering parts and wishing that I'd checked a few things that I hadn't checked, and then having to go back and redo things. So lesson learned there. Watch on. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Big episode this week. It's been a little while, but we've got some cool stuff coming up. We're going to actually wire up the engine, we're going to finish plumbing the cooling system, and we're going to do a very first test fire. So you're going to be here with me when I start up the engine for the first time. I'm going to take you around now and just give you a little heads up on what's been happening on the Shoebox Ford project since the last video. First of all, you can see that the radiator is now installed. Obviously these bolts need to be cut down, but I've put brackets in place. We've got the radiator hose top and the radiator hose bottom on there. This is going to be removed a little bit later in this episode, as I need to do a bit of work on this elbow here. We've got the fan on, and we've got the fan belt and all the tension set. I've gone round and tied up all of the spark plug leads, tightened all the spark plugs, got fuel line, fuel filter and everything going to the carb. So now it's a case of wiring it all up, and I've been through all the rest of the old wiring loom, and I'm going to just take you through how I'm going to wire it up now. So now everything's actually connected in the car, it's time to wire it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire up a very basic set of circuits in terms of what the car actually needs to get started, almost like you do on a test stand. So I'll sketch out a little diagram of what I'm intending to do and use and wire in. So obviously we have a battery here running to ground there, and then we're going to have an ignition switch, which I'll just draw like that. Now I've got a 4-pole ignition switch, but I'm not going to use all of the contacts on there. I'm going to run one wire from ignition to the positive terminal of the battery, and that is going to be into the battery terminal on the ignition. And I'm going to run from the ignition terminal on there a wire off to the positive side of the coil, which is grounded through the spark plugs there like that. And at the same time I'm also going to be running a cable to the fuel pump, because I only want the fuel pump running whilst the ignition's on, certainly for this bit. So that will get power to the fuel pump, they'll get power to the coil, but it won't get power to the starter. I don't want to run, I don't know, there's big loads to that starter, so I want to run like 0 gauge cable to the starter, so I'm going to use a starter relay. I've got a 4-terminal starter relay, of which we're only going to need 3 of those terminals. So here is our starter, which again is grounded through the case into the body like that, and sitting between there and the ignition and the battery we are going to have a relay. Now there's going to be a large 0 gauge cable running from there to the battery, a direct connection, and out of the switched side of the relay there is going to be again another 0 gauge cable running to the positive side of the starter there. And then from the switch within the relay, which is the ST starter section of my ignition switch, we are going to have a cable running through there. So power goes to the relay, you switch on the ignition to the first section, first part of the key, it will turn on the fuel pump and the coil, and as you turn over the second turn, it will energize that relay and it will send power directly from the battery directly through to the starter, and it should start the car. So that's the wiring diagram. That's what I'm going to build, that's what I'm going to put in the car, and that's what we're going to use to do our test fire. I've now followed my own wiring diagram, and I've put everything in the car. You can't see it here. The battery is sitting in the passenger side footwell, and everything else is run through the firewall, and I've got the ignition barrel just insulating taped to the steering column. I need to come back and finish a few little things off, but as you can see, it's got a little bit dark now, so we'll pick up again in the morning and finishing off the wiring, and then I'll take you around how that diagram translated into reality, and then we can start looking at things like the plumbing and the hose bits. Well, as if by magic, it's the next day and the sun has come back up, so let's have a little look at how that wiring diagram translated into reality and the little bits that I had to do this morning. So as I mentioned, as it was getting dark, here is the battery in here, so we can compare this to the wiring diagram that was used. So there is the main ground from there, which is just grounded to a bit of the firewall that I've scratched the surface of. We have the main wire from the positive to the relay. We also have this purple, which is this one that is running up here from the battery to the battery terminal on the back of the ignition barrel, which, as you can see, is just cable tied to the steering column. And coming off the back of that, we have the red wire that runs to the starter relay as the trigger wire, and we have the green wire, which is the coil wire there. We'll look at that on the other side of the firewall in a moment. And then there is a wire that runs all the way back there to the fuel pump, which is underneath the car down there, and that is our entire wiring loom for firing it up. We come around the other side here, you can see I've just cable tied this out of the way, but that's the live to the starter that comes out the back side of the relay that's triggered by the ignition. We've got the positive side of the coil there, we've got the negative side of the coil going to the distributor. The only reason why I can't test fire this now is twofold. First of all, because we've got rubber engine mounts there, so I'm not certain how good the earth is between the block and the chassis, and obviously that's pretty important for actually making it work. So I've got an earth lead coming, which I'm going to run from the back of the starter there and actually directly connect to this point temporarily up here to form the ground for all of those circuits there. Secondly, I don't want to do any of the electrical testing yet because I don't want to spin the starter over, because if I spin the starter over with the engine empty of coolant, I'm likely to damage the bearings in the new water pump because there's no water in there. And the reason why there's no water in there, swinging around here, is because, as I mentioned earlier on in the video, I need to do a little bit of work on this, and what I need to do to this is to put some flanges into this elbow, which I'll remove in a little while. And you can see where I've had to cut it short, there's no flanged ends, there's no flanged ends on there, and that's just going to cause a water leak. But in order to put those flanges in, I'm waiting for a part to arrive that I can use to make a micro bead roller specifically for this job. So, as has been the case on this video so far, we're going to have to wait until some bits arrive, which means I'm going to check out again until the next day. So, see you in a day. Okay, so I've now waited a couple of days and the parts that I've been looking for have arrived. So I have taken off the elbow from the cooling system, and you might wonder, well, why on earth I've actually bothered that, why didn't I leave it in there? I did mention earlier that there was no flanges on the end of it. The reason for that is because it was originally, just looking around to see if I can find the bits I cut off, it was originally a lot larger. Okay, so it was about that big, and it had a nice flanged end on it, which is kind of what you want for holding on hoses, because you put the hose over, you clamp it down around there and it seals up and it stops leaks. But obviously I had to cut that bit off, and so I was left with this. It's not a massively neat cut because I don't have a pipe cutter that's large enough for this, so I had to whip it off with an angle grinder and then just file it flat. So it doesn't look particularly neat, but what I do need to do is I need to put in a flange on the end there. So what am I going to do? Well, as usual, I'm going to chop some stuff up that I've got and I'm going to build a little tool. Now, I'm not going to be taking credit for the design of this tool, but this is what I'm planning on doing. Saw this on, most recently, an Aussie fella on YouTube. Honestly, can't remember his name. I want to say Penis Head, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't that. But it's an Aussie fella who did this, and he nicked the idea of somebody else, and I've seen it on a few forums before, and it's making a little bead roller by taking a nice pair of vice grips and a penny washer. Now, my first attempt is going to be a single M12 penny washer, and what you do is you weld this to the jaws of your vice grips like that, and you can use this then to form a bead in there. But I had all of these things, so what was I waiting for? Well, this is going to act as one part of the die for pressing the bead in, and so we need something to receive this, to actually allow us to push this into the aluminium and to form something, and that is what I was waiting for. I'm just going to pause because I've obviously left it on the other side of the garage. I'll bring it back and I'll show you roughly what I'm attempting to do. Okay, found it. So all it is an exhaust clamp. That was what I was waiting for. An exhaust clamp that will fit in a 51mm or 2" in US speak bit of pipe. And if I set it up so it's roughly there, I'll be able to use my vice grips and my little handmade die to hopefully force that material down into this gap and roll it round and round and round and so on until we end up with a little lip, or a little flange I should say, which might look vaguely like that, might be nowhere near the size, it's probably not going to be as deep, probably not going to be as wide, but we'll give it a go. Now, because my camera suffers from a lot of lens flare if I try and weld on camera, as you've probably seen in some other videos, especially if it's inside, I'm not going to actually film myself welding this, but I'm going to weld the washer onto the end there, and then we'll bring the tool back and we'll have a little go at making it work and see how it goes down, so we can then install it back on the car. So let's check back in a few moments and see how many tools I've ruined in the process of making something that may or may not work. Okay, well there we go. It's not going to win any prizes for neatness, but it is welded to the end of these vice grips, which means these are effectively ruined until such time as I chop the washer off when I'm done with it. So what I'm going to do with this now is get my exhaust clamp like that, put my tube into it, and then I'm going to set up my mini bead roller like that, and I'm going to go around and I'm going to keep compressing it. Now it's going to take me a little while to set the tension on these vice grips to the right tension, so I'm not going to video that because otherwise we'll be here forever watching me adjust it, unadjust it, and so on. So what I'll do is I'll check back in a moment once I've gotten to the right tension and we can see how well or badly it is forming. Okay, it's just as well I did do that off camera because it took quite a while, but whilst I wouldn't claim it's absolutely indistinguishable from a factory formed flange, you can see it actually worked pretty well. So I'm going to do the other side there. That fella's name was Drew Penis, by the way. I knew it had something to do with dicks. Aussie dude, pretty good. Does some fabrication here, so he nicked the idea of somebody else, but that my knocked up with some slightly warpy edges and the original, there's not much in it, and I've test fitted one of the hoses on there and there's now no daylight gaps around it, so it's going to work absolutely as intended. And so before I refit this, I will bead roll with my little tool the inside of this one here, and so I can honestly say this is actually not ruined. This is gonna form part of my arsenal of homemade tools for metal forming, and you never know, it might even come in handy for something else. So next step, once this is done, is to chuck coolant into the car and make sure that there are no leaks. Once it's got coolant in the car, I will then do the electrical testing, and then we'll pull fuel through into the pressure regulator, which is also the fuel filter, and then we'll be able to do a test fire. I did remember as I was driving home from work this afternoon that actually one of the things I forgot to put into the circuit that I built was a wire running from the coil to the choke, because it's got a 12 volt powered bimetallic strip choke. So you plug it into the coil, and as it warms up it then opens the choke. So I don't really want to run it fully choked, so I'm going to wire that in as well before we start it. So again, there's going to be a little bit of a delay because this is not my day job, shockingly enough, as you may have guessed from my mediocre amount of talent. And then when I come back from work tomorrow, I should be able to finish this off, and then I should be able to chuck the coolant in, and then we'll video the little electrical tests, because again, in case you want to do something similar on your own. And then at the weekend, hopefully we'll fire it up, and maybe this video will go out on Sunday. It's now Thursday, so it's been a little bit of a longer brew one, but then again, telling a little bit more of a story. And if you're enjoying the story so far, please give us a like, please give us a subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications. I'll give you another little reminder at the end, there are loads of other videos on this channel as well, both on this car, little Fiat 500s, and stuff on carburetors and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to disappear for a night, and for you it will be seconds in YouTube/TV land, and I'll see you on the other side. Finished product here, and we're going to go stick it back into the position where it needs to actually be. So those are all ramrodded down tight now, and let's see whether we can chuck some coolant in it and hopefully have it not pour out all over the floor. So we've got about 18 litres of this stuff to put in. This is concentrated, so I'm going to stick it in one of the bottles. Then I'm going to fill it full of water, put it in, and just repeat until it's all done. Okay, looks like we've got a slight leak already. Let me just tighten these up and fix that. Okay, so I think I've fixed most of the leaks now. I'll put the rest of that bottle of coolant in. I've now filled this up with water. I'm going to chuck the water in there. So we're now at 50-50 dilution. It's only about half full, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up some of the overspill. I'm going to leave it overnight to see how much more leaks out and whether there's any weeps from behind where the water pump is, because some of those bolts go into the water jacket and they may not have quite enough sealant on them, so I may have to back those out, seal them up, put them back in again, and then we'll see whether we can keep all of the coolant in there, because that would obviously be quite useful. At the very least, my new pipes are not the bit that's leaking, so I feel quite happy about that. So before I try and fire it up, I want to do some electrical testing. I haven't got a battery in here at the moment because, as I said, I don't want to spin the starter over when I don't have to, so I'm just going to do some electrical continuity testing just to make sure that the circuits are wired up the way that I expect they are going to be. So I've just got a normal multimeter here set to resistance, and sets you should be able to hear when there is continuity, and I'm just going to make some tests first of all between the battery positive and the start solenoid, and then between the battery and the starter side of the solenoid, which is dead as you'd expect. And now what I want to do is test the connection between the varying sides of the switch in its varying different positions. So we know that there's no live going direct to the battery now, which is good, but what I am going to want to do is put key in and turn this, if I can get this to turn properly with one hand. Turn this to the starter setting, which is right over like that, and then at the same time try and test between both sides of the starter solenoid. And we now have continuity across the starter solenoid when this is in its starter position. So that means that the starter will work when it's supposed to work. But if I also just put this in its ignition position, we should find, if I test between here and the coil, that we've got power to the coil. So let's see if I can spin the camera around to actually do that. Chances are I probably can't, so you may just have to listen a little bit, because I can probably reach over here and make the connections that I need. If I undo these cables enough. So I want to go from the live side of the battery. No, I can't reach the coil up there, so I just won't bother doing that one. At the very least, I know that there's no power to the starter until there needs to be power to the starter. So the rest of the tests I'll kind of do off camera, but it's just simply a case of continuity testing between the live and the varying different bits across the car that you need to get power to, with the switch in the positions. So off should be nothing. First section should get power to the ignition. Second, the spring-loaded bit should get power to the relay that we talked about in a previous video, or earlier on in this video I should say. And if that is energizing, which it is, we're all good. So first job of the day is now to try and prime the fuel bowl. So let's see if I can get that in there and actually get it to turn over. So fuel pump is running. It's running dry at the minute. Let's hear if it actually pulls any fuel through. Doesn't sound like it's got any fuel yet, although it's quietening down a little bit now, so it might have picked something up from the tank. So I've cheated and just chucked some fuel down the carburetor because that wasn't pulling anything through yet. So let's just see whether we can get it to even cough. Okay, so we don't seem to be getting any, well, I'm guessing we're not getting any sparks. We seem to have fuel, so let me go and do some more electrical testing and we'll see where we're at with that. So it's a little while later now. There was a bit of a ground issue in the coil, so we weren't actually getting any spark at all. I've now in the distributor casing, so I've stripped that down, changed that. I've also managed to get the airlock out the fuel line, so we now have fuel inside the regulator that you can see there, and so hopefully inside the fuel bowl, and it might be worth seeing whether it's going to crank over and fire up now.
course it might help if I put the positive lead back on the battery. Generally having some electricity is useful. I think we can safely say that the timing's out. I don't know whether you could see the flashes of flame on the video there, but that's a hell of a lot closer to life than it was a very short while ago. Okay, so it appears from having gone through all of the timing that actually the plug leads were all off by one. Not because the plug leads were off by one, but because I think the orientation of the drive shaft that comes from the oil pump meant that we were about 60 degrees, 45 degrees, so somewhere in that region out at the distributor. So I'm going to give it one more go, and if it still doesn't fire, I'm going to have to dig into it a little bit deeper and we'll have to pick it up in another video, but it's a hell of a lot more alive than what it was. So let's have a little go. So when I swapped him around the wrong way. So now it's out by two, but the opposite direction. Because I forgot which way the distributor turned. So let's go and try again, but properly this time. So I ran out of time last night after having gone back, retimed everything, reset the distributor up, and yeah, wasn't getting anything this morning. So I sprayed some Easy Start down the carb, because I had noticed that where I was squirting the accelerator pump, it didn't really smell much like fuel. So it does appear, probably should have checked this first, that the tank had got a bit of condensation in it, and where I'd chucked another 5 litres of fuel in, all I was pulling through is water, as that is basically water with a tiny bit of fuel floating on the top of it. I use tiniest in the loosest sense of the word. So all the spark plugs are now out, all of the cylinders are open. It's a nice warm breezy day, so we'll let it all evaporate out. I'll siphon that out, I'll fill this from a jerry can, fill the fuel bowl. I've disconnected the fuel pump so I'm not pumping any more water through, and then we'll come back and we'll give it another go. Top marks for not checking the obvious there, folks. I think we'll call that good. Once I've got a proper fuel pump on there, we'll do the cam braking and everything. But yeah, she's a goer. Nice one.